What do you think happened the morning after the news of Joseph's disappearance? The sun rose just as it always had. The birds began to sing. The sheep wandered out to graze. Smoke slowly rose from the cooking fires. From a distance, everything looked normal. But nothing was. Days before, 10 brothers had sold their own brother. They had dipped his beautiful coat in blood. They had carried it home to their father. And they had watched Jacob's heart break. Now they had to wake up, look each other in the eye, and pretend life could simply go on. Can you imagine eating breakfast beside someone who knows the same terrible secret you do? No one wanted to speak. No one knew what to say. Sometimes silence can be louder than shouting. That morning, silence settled over Jacob's camp. And it stayed there, not for a few days or months, for 22 long years. When people tell the story of Joseph, they usually talk about the dreams, the colorful coat, the pit, the journey to Egypt, the palace, the years in prison, and finally, the throne. Joseph's story is unforgettable. But there is another story that is often forgotten. What happened to the brothers who went home? How do you live with a secret like that? How do you face your father every single day, knowing you are the reason his heart is broken? How do you laugh around the evening fire when you remember your little brother crying for help? All 10 brothers carried that secret. But one brother carried something even heavier. Reuben. Unlike the others, Reuben held on to the belief that Joseph was still alive. That one hope became the only light he had. For 22 years, he held on to it. No one slept well. Every time they closed their eyes, they saw Joseph. His frightened face, his cries from the pit, the moment the caravan disappeared over the horizon. Long before the sun came up, the brothers began stepping out of their tents. Dan came first. Normally, he hated waking up early, but this morning sleep had been impossible. He sat beside the cold fire and stared into the ashes. Soon Simeon came out. He didn't say a word. He simply sat across from Dan, then Levi, then Judah. One by one, the brothers gathered around the fire. But no one spoke. No one reached for food. No one even thought to light the fire again. The silence was heavy. It felt as though the whole camp was holding its breath. Then Zebulun looked around. He counted the faces. His eyes stopped. Someone was missing. He quietly asked, "Where's Reuben?" The question hung in the air. No one answered, because no one knew. And somehow, that made the morning even more unsettling. Simeon slowly stood. His face was calm, but his eyes were hard. Then he said, "Find him." The brothers spread out across the camp and outside the camp. It didn't take long. They found Reuben standing at the edge of the empty pit. The same pit where Joseph had begged them for mercy. The same pit where Reuben had planned to rescue him. He stood there without moving. His eyes were fixed on the darkness below, as if he expected Joseph to still be there. No one spoke at first. Even Simeon remained silent. He walked to the edge of the pit and looked down himself. There was nothing but dust. Then he turned to Reuben. The oldest brother looked exhausted. His eyes were red. His shoulders were heavy. He looked like a man carrying a weight no one else could see. Finally, Simeon spoke.
"We should go back. He was here some days ago." "Reuben."
"Just a few days ago. He was standing right there. He was only 17. And we..."
"Not here. Come back to camp. You believed he was alive. Hold on to that."
For the first time, Reuben looked at him. There was pain in his eyes, regret, and something deeper still. The look of a man blaming himself for a mistake he could never undo. Simeon stared at his brother for a long moment. Then he did something no one expected. He placed a firm hand on Reuben's shoulder. It wasn't gentle. That wasn't Simeon's way. But it was steady, strong. It was his way of saying, "You're not facing this alone." Reuben closed his eyes. He took one slow breath, then another. Finally, he turned away from the pit. Together, the brothers walked back to the camp. They sat once again around the cold fire. Still no one lit it. The ashes remained cold. The silence remained heavy. 9 brothers stared into a fire that no longer burned. And one brother held tightly to the only hope left in his heart. Joseph is alive. He repeated those words again and again, because they were the only thing keeping him from falling into despair. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. Months become years. The seasons change again and again. Time has a way of moving forward, even when a broken heart feels frozen. The sun continued to rise each morning. The sheep still had to be fed. The wells still had to be dug. Children were born. Harvests came and went. Life carried on. But Jacob's family was never the same. But everywhere you looked, there was something missing. Joseph's place at the evening fire stayed empty. His laughter was gone. His dreams were never spoken about again. Yet somehow, everyone remembered. Jacob still led the family. He still made decisions, cared for the flocks and servants. He was still their father. But after Joseph disappeared, something inside him seemed to fade. His smile became rare. His voice grew quieter. Sometimes he would stand outside his tent and stare down the road for a long time, as if he expected someone to come walking home. Someone who never did. His sons saw it every day. And every day, they remembered why. Guilt changed each brother in a different way. Simeon became even tougher than before. He spoke little. His patience grew shorter. Anyone who asked too many questions quickly learned to stop asking. Levi stayed close to Simeon. The 2 brothers were almost never apart. Where Simeon went, Levi followed. Dan changed in a different way. He talked more than ever. He joked. He laughed loudly. He filled every quiet moment with stories. But even laughter cannot hide a guilty heart forever. And Reuben worked. Before the first light touched the hills, he was already awake. While everyone else was still sleeping, he was leading sheep across the fields. He repaired fences. He carried heavy loads. He worked until his hands were sore and his body ached. Not because someone ordered him to, but hard work helped him forget. At least for a little while. When his body grew tired, his mind became quieter. But only for a while. Every evening, the memories returned. Joseph's face, Joseph's voice, Joseph crying from the bottom of the pit. No amount of work could silence those memories. One morning, long before sunrise, Reuben was checking the flock beneath a sky filled with stars. The camp behind him was still asleep. He thought he was alone. Then he heard footsteps. It was Zebulun. Without saying a word, Zebulun walked over and sat on a nearby rock. But Reuben kept working. Neither brother spoke. Minutes passed. The only sounds were sheep moving through the grass and the gentle wind. Finally, Zebulun says, "Do you still think about him?" Reuben didn't answer right away. He kept tying a loose rope. He checked another sheep. Then he stopped. He looked across the quiet fields. Reuben, barely above a whisper, says, "Every single day." Zebulun lowered his head. There was nothing left to say. Some pains are too deep for long conversations. The 2 brothers stood together in the silence, watching the first light of morning slowly spread across the hills. Another day had begun. Another day without Joseph. Another day carrying a secret that seemed heavier with every passing year. 1 year after Joseph disappeared. The fire has nearly burned out. Most of the camp is asleep. That night, Reuben couldn't sleep. Sleep had become difficult ever since Joseph disappeared. Whenever the camp grew quiet, his thoughts grew loud. As he lay inside his tent, he heard something unusual. Soft footsteps, the quiet rustle of cloth, a bag being packed. Someone was leaving. Reuben listened carefully. He recognized the footsteps. Judah. He didn't know where Judah was going, but he knew this wasn't a short journey. Judah had made up his mind long before this night. Now, he was simply walking away. Reuben stayed where he was. He listened as Judah crossed the camp. The footsteps grew quieter and quieter until they disappeared into the darkness. Then there was only silence. The strange kind of silence that comes when someone who has always been there is suddenly gone. Reuben could have called after him. He could have stepped outside. He could have asked, "Where are you going? When will you return?" But he didn't. He simply stared into the darkness above him. And for the first time, he understood. Part of him had wanted to leave too. Not because he hated his family or run away, but because every corner of the camp reminded him of Joseph. The empty place by the fire, his father's sorrow, the secret they all carried. Some days, it felt easier to leave than to stay. Judah had walked away. Reuben had stayed. Both choices were painful. Before sunrise, Reuben got out of bed, just as he always did. He gathered the flock, checked the water, walked the familiar paths. Everything looked the same, but something had changed. Judah was gone. That meant some more changes in the camp. For years, Reuben had almost become the man he was meant to be. Now he had no choice. So Reuben did what he had learned to do. He took one step, then another, and began the day's work. Sometimes courage doesn't begin with great speeches. Sometimes it begins by simply getting up and doing what needs to be done. A few nights later, Simeon came looking for Reuben. That alone was unusual. Simeon was not the kind of man who sought people out. If he had something to say, people usually came to him. But this night, he walked quietly through the camp until he found his older brother sitting alone beside a small fire. For a while, they were both quiet. The fire crackled between them. The flames danced in the darkness. Finally, Simeon said something.
How long are you going to keep doing this? Doing what?
You hardly sleep. You leave before sunrise. You work until you can barely stand. And every night, you stare at Father's tent. It's as if you're waiting for something.
How long will this go on?
Until it's over. It is over. It ended the day we sold Joseph. The past cannot be changed. No. It ended for us. But not for him.
What do you mean?
Joseph is alive.
The words hung in the night air. Simeon stared at his brother. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackling fire.
You don't know that.
I do.
How?
Because I was going back. I never meant for him to stay in that pit. I was going to rescue him. When I came back, he was gone. If the traders bought him, then he lived. I've believed that every single day since.
Simeon looked down at the fire. He had never heard Reuben say those words before. Not like this. For years, he had assumed Reuben's guilt came from failing to save Joseph. Now he realized something else. Reuben wasn't only carrying guilt. He was carrying hope. A hope that refused to die.
If you're right, then one day we'll have to face him. I know.
And if that day comes, what will we say?
Reuben had no answer. What words could erase 22 years? What apology could heal a brother's broken heart? None. The silence between them said everything. After a while, Simeon stood. He brushed the dust from his clothes. Then he looked at Reuben one last time.
May God have mercy on us all.
Without another word, he walked back toward the camp. Reuben remained where he was. The fire slowly burned lower. One by one, the flames disappeared. Soon only glowing embers remained. But inside Reuben, one small flame still burned. A hope he had carried for years. He whispered the words to himself once more. Joseph is alive. Then he lifted his eyes toward the stars, pondering where his younger brother might be, and whether he was looking at those same stars too. Years passed. The brothers grew older. Their children grew taller. The lines on Jacob's face grew deeper. Still, Joseph never came home. Then one year, something changed. First, no one noticed. The rains came later than usual. The grass didn't grow as thick. The streams became smaller. The sheep grew thinner. The harvest wasn't as good as before. People told themselves, next season will be better. But it wasn't. The next season was even worse. Soon the wells began to dry up. Families worried about their food. Travelers brought the same troubling news wherever they came from. The famine was spreading. Village after village, town after town. People were running out of grain. Fear began to travel faster than the wind. But everywhere the traders stopped, they spoke about one place, Egypt, again, and again, and again. A trader said, they still have grain. Another said, the storehouses are full. Another voice said, someone in Egypt prepared for this. Reuben heard the name wherever he went, at the wells, around the evening fires, among passing merchants. Egypt. At first, it was only the name of a distant land. But the more he heard it, the more it stirred something deep inside him. He couldn't explain it. It was as if a quiet voice inside his heart kept whispering, pay attention. He said nothing to his brothers. For 22 years, Reuben had learned something important. Sometimes, God begins moving long before anyone can see what he is doing. One evening, Jacob called his sons together. They gathered around him. The years had changed their father. His hair had turned white. His shoulders were bent with age. But when he spoke, his voice still carried authority. He said to them, I've heard there is grain in Egypt. Why are you standing here looking at each other? Go, buy grain for us, so that we may live and not die. The brothers looked at themselves. No one spoke. Egypt, the very place everyone had been talking about. The journey would be long, dangerous, uncertain, but they had no choice. Their families needed food. Their father was depending on them. As the silence stretched among them, Reuben felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, small and quiet, almost impossible to explain. It was like standing before a door that had been locked for decades, and hearing it slowly begin to open. He didn't know why. He didn't know what waited on the other side. He only knew that somehow this journey mattered more than any journey he had ever taken before. He glanced toward the southern horizon, toward Egypt, toward a land he had never seen, completely unaware that his younger brother was there, alive, waiting, and that, after 22 long years, God was about to do what no one thought was possible. That evening, someone came to find Reuben. Your mother wants to see you. Reuben immediately left what he was doing, walked across the quiet camp and entered Leah's tent. She was sitting on a woven mat beside a small lamp. Time had changed her. Her hair had turned completely gray. The lines on her face told the story of many difficult years. Years of loving, years of waiting, years of carrying pain without complaining. Yet when she looked at Reuben, her eyes were filled with the same warmth they had always held. He sat down beside her, just as he had done since he was a little boy. For a while, they said nothing. The little lamp filled the silence with its gentle glow. Finally, Leah spoke.
You're going to see him again.
Joseph?
Yes, Joseph.
Mother, how can you know that?
The day you came home, you never told me Joseph was dead. You only told me he was gone. I watched your eyes. I listened to your voice. And a mother knows. I've believed ever since that somewhere my son is still alive.
If I see him, what do I say?
You'll know.
Reuben lowered his head. For 22 years, he had carried that hope almost alone. Now he realized he never had. His mother had been carrying it too, quietly and faithfully, all these years. After a long silence, Reuben asked the question that had lived inside him for years.
If I see him, what do I say?
You'll know. For 22 years, God has been preparing your heart. When the moment comes, He will give you the words.
Reuben's eyes filled with tears. He reached for his mother's hand. She squeezed it gently. Neither of them spoke again. They didn't need to. Sometimes, love says its greatest words in silence. A few weeks later, Leah quietly went to sleep, and she never woke up. There was no struggle, no fear, only peace, just as she had lived. She slipped into eternity with quiet grace. When Reuben found her, he sat beside her for a long time. He didn't call anyone. He simply stayed there, remembering, thanking God for the woman who had believed in him, even when he struggled to believe in himself. Outside, the sun slowly rose over the camp. A new day had begun, one that Leah would never see. But before she closed her eyes, she had left her son one final gift. Hope. Not hope in circumstances, but hope in God's promises. And Reuben carried that hope with him, all the way to Egypt. Morning came. The day had finally arrived. The journey to Egypt was about to begin. The camp slowly came to life. Donkeys were loaded. Food was packed. Water skins were checked one last time. The brothers moved from place to place, making ready for the long journey ahead. Dan was already talking. He had ideas about which road they should take, which wells they should stop at, how quickly they could travel. Simeon listened for a while. Then he quietly ended the discussion with a single look. Dan sighed and continued loading the donkeys. Some things never changed. Reuben had packed everything the night before. There wasn't much to carry. A small bag, a walking staff, a cloak for the cold nights ahead. He stood at the edge of the camp, looking toward the Egypt. The road disappeared into the morning light. He had no idea where it would lead, but something inside him told him this journey would change everything. Behind him, he heard footsteps. He turned. It was Jacob. The old man had come to watch his sons leave. Age had bent his back. His beard had turned white, yet there was still strength in his eyes. He looked past his sons, toward the road. The same road he had watched for 22 years. The same road he had hoped would one day bring Joseph home. For a long moment, father and son stood there. Then Jacob looked at Reuben. Their eyes met. No words were needed. Reuben saw the sorrow his father had carried all these years. Jacob saw the burden his firstborn had carried in silence. Neither man spoke about Joseph nor mentioned the past. But somehow, they understood each other better than they ever had before. Jacob stepped closer. He placed both hands on Reuben's shoulders and quietly said, "Bring everyone home." Reuben swallowed hard, nodded and says, "I will do everything I can." Jacob lowered his hands. The brothers gathered together. One by one, they started down the road. The camp slowly disappeared behind them. The hills stretched out before them. Dust rose beneath their feet. With every step, they moved closer to Egypt, closer to Joseph, closer to a meeting that only God could have planned. Reuben walked at the front of the group. He didn't know what waited for him. He didn't know that the frightened 17-year-old boy he had tried to rescue was now one of the most powerful rulers in the world. He didn't know that in some days, he would stand face to face with his younger brother without recognizing him. He didn't know that Joseph would understand every word he spoke, while pretending not to. He only knew one thing. The road was open, and after 22 years of carrying guilt, hope, and responsibility, he had finally become the man who was ready to walk in it. Sometimes, God doesn't change our lives in a single moment. Sometimes, He spends years preparing us for one journey. Reuben thought he was traveling to Egypt for grain, but God was leading him toward something far greater: forgiveness, restoration, and the brother he had never stopped hoping was alive. Can I ask you something? Have you ever felt like your life wasn't moving? Not because something terrible was happening, and not because something wonderful was happening. Just ordinary days, one after another. You wake up, go to work, take care of your family, and solve today's problems. Then tomorrow, you do it all again. After a while, you begin to wonder, does any of this matter? Is God doing anything at all? If you've ever asked those questions, You're not alone. Reuben lived with those questions for 22 years without answers. 22 years carrying guilt and hoping Joseph was still alive. 22 years of ordinary mornings, ordinary evenings, and ordinary work. Nothing seemed to change. But something was changing. Reuben was. When Joseph disappeared, Reuben was a man who acted without thinking. A man weighed down by failure. A man who couldn't undo his mistakes. But during those long years, God was quietly shaping him, teaching him patience, humility, and responsibility. Not through miracles or visions, but through ordinary life. One faithful day after another. Maybe that's where you are today. You're waiting for a prayer to be answered. Waiting for a door to open. Waiting for your family to heal. Waiting for direction. Waiting for God to move. And it feels like nothing is happening. But what if something is? What if God is doing his greatest work inside you before he changes what is around you? Reuben thought those years had been wasted. He couldn't see that every difficult day, every quiet morning, every painful memory was preparing him for the moment he would stand before Joseph again. God wasn't delaying the story. He was writing it. Maybe your story feels unfinished too. Maybe you're standing in the long middle. So, don't lose heart. The God who was leading Joseph in Egypt was also leading Reuben in Canaan. Neither brother could see the whole picture, but God could, and he never lost sight of either of them. Next time, 10 brothers will arrive in Egypt looking for food. They'll bow before a powerful ruler. They'll believe they're standing before a stranger. But the man on the throne already knows exactly who they are. And one brother, the oldest one, is about to discover that hope was never foolish after all. Joseph really was alive. Crowns in the Dust, the Reuben series, episode 8 coming soon.